An Apology for the Bible by Richard Watson. Letter 3. Having done with what you call the grammatical evidence that Moses was not the author of the books attributed to him, you come to your historical and chronological evidence, and you begin with Genesis. Your first argument is taken from the single word Dan being found in Genesis, when it appears from the book of Judges that the town of Laish was not called Dan till above 330 years after the death of Moses. Therefore, the writer of Genesis, you conclude, must have lived after the town of Laish had the name of Dan given to it. Lest this objection should not be obvious enough to a common capacity, you illustrate it in the following manner. Havre de Grace was called Havre Marat in 1793. Should then any dateless writing be found in after times with the name of Havre Marat, it would be certain evidence that such a writing could not have been written till after the year 1793. This is a wrong conclusion. Suppose some hot Republican should at this day publish a new edition of any old history of France, and instead of Havre de Grace should write Havre Marat, and that 2,000 or 3,000 years hence a man like yourself should on that account reject the whole history as spurious, would he be justified in so doing? Would it not be reasonable to tell him that the name Havre Marat had been inserted not by the original author of the history, but by a subsequent editor of it, and to refer him for a proof of the genuineness of the book to the testimony of the whole French nation? This supposition so obviously applies to your difficulty that I cannot but recommend it to your impartial attention. But if this solution does not please you, I desire it may be proved that the Dan mentioned in Genesis was the same town as the Dan mentioned in Judges. I desire further to have it proved that the Dan mentioned in Genesis was the name of a town and not of a river. It is merely said, Abraham pursued them, the enemies of Lot, to Dan. Now a river was full as likely as a town to stop a pursuit. Lot, we know, was settled in the plain of Jordan, and Jordan, we know, was composed of the united streams of two rivers, called Jor and Dan. Your next difficulty respects its being said in Genesis, these are the kings that reigned in Edom before there reigned any king over the children of Israel. This passage could only have been written, you say, and I think you say rightly, after the first king began to reign over Israel. So far from being written by Moses, it could not have been written till the time of Saul at the least. I admit this inference, but I deny its application. A small addition to a book does not destroy either the genuineness or the authenticity of the whole book. I am not ignorant of the manner in which commentators have answered this objection of Spinoza, without making the concession which I have made. But I have no scruple in admitting that the passage in question, consisting of 9 verses, containing the genealogy of some kings of Edom, might have been inserted in the book of Genesis after the book of Chronicles, which was called in Greek by a name importing that it contained things left out in other books, was written. The learned have shown that interpolations have happened to other books, but these insertions by other hands have never been considered as invalidating the authority of those books. Take away from Genesis, you say, the belief that Moses was the author, on which only the strange belief that it is the word of God is stood, and there remains nothing of Genesis but an anonymous book of stories, fables, traditionary or invented absurdities, or of downright lies. What? Is it a story then that the world had a beginning, and that the author of it was God? If you deem this a story, I am not disputing with a deistical philosopher, but with an atheistic madman. Is it a story that our first parents fell from a paradisiacal state? That this earth was destroyed by a deluge? That Noah and his family were preserved in the ark? And that the world has been re-peopled by his descendants? Look into a book so common that almost everybody has it, and so excellent that no person ought to be without it, Grotius on the truth of the Christian religion, and you will there meet with abundant testimony to the truth of all the principal facts recorded in Genesis. The testimony is not that of Jews, Christians, and priests. It is the testimony of the philosophers, historians, and poets of antiquity. The oldest book in the world is Genesis, and it is remarkable that those books which come nearest to it in age are those which make either the most distinct mention or the most evident allusion to the facts related in Genesis concerning the formation of the world from a chaotic mass, the primeval innocence and subsequent fall of man, the longevity of mankind in the first ages of the world, the depravity of the antediluvians, and the destruction of the world. Read the 10th chapter of Genesis. It may appear to you to contain nothing but an uninteresting narration of the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, a mere fable, an invented absurdity, a downright lie. No, sir, it is one of the most valuable and the most venerable records of antiquity. It explains what all profane historians were ignorant of, the origin of nations. Had it told us, as other books do, that one nation had sprung out of the earth they inhabited, another from a cricket or a grasshopper, another from an oak, another from a mushroom, another from a dragon's tooth, then indeed it would have merited the appellation you with so much temerity bestow upon it. Instead of these absurdities, it gives such an account of peopling the earth after the deluge as no other book in the world ever did give, and the truth of which all other books in the world which contain anything on the subject confirm. The last verse of the chapter says, "These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood." It would require great learning to trace out precisely either the actual situation of all the countries in which these founders of empires settled, or to ascertain the extent of their dominions. This, however, has been done by various authors, to the satisfaction of all competent judges. So much, at least to my satisfaction, that had I no other proof of the authenticity of Genesis, I should consider this as sufficient. But without the aid of learning, any man who can barely read his Bible, and has but heard of such people as the Assyrians, the Elamites, the Lydians, the Medes, the Ionians, the Thracians, will readily acknowledge that they had Assur and Elam and Lud and Madai and Javan and Tiras, grandsons of Noah, for their respective founders. And knowing this, he will not, I hope, part with his Bible as a system of fables. I am no enemy to philosophy, but when philosophy would rob me of my Bible, I must say of it as Cicero said of the 12 Tables, "This little book alone exceeds the libraries of all the philosophers in the weight of its authority and in the extent of its utility." From the abuse of the Bible, you proceed to that of Moses and again bring forward the subject of his wars in the land of Canaan. There are many men who look upon all war, would to God that all men saw it in the same light, with extreme abhorrence, as afflicting mankind with calamities not necessary, shocking to humanity, and repugnant to reason. But is it repugnant to reason that God should, by an express act of his providence, destroy a wicked nation? I am fond of considering the goodness of God as the leading principle of his conduct towards mankind, of considering his justice as subservient to his mercy. He punishes individuals and nations with the rod of his wrath, but I am persuaded that all his punishments originate in his abhorrence of sin, are calculated to lessen its influence, and are proofs of his goodness, inasmuch as it may not be possible for omnipotence itself to communicate supreme happiness to the human race whilst they continue servants of sin. The destruction of the Canaanites exhibits to all nations in all ages a signal proof of God's displeasure against sin. It has been to others, and it is to ourselves, a benevolent warning. Moses would have been the wretch you represent him, had he acted by his own authority alone. But you may as reasonably attribute cruelty and murder to the judge of the land in condemning criminals to death, as butchery and massacre to Moses in executing the command of God. The Midianites, through the counsel of Balaam, and by the vicious instrumentality of their women, had seduced a part of the Israelites to idolatry, to the impure worship of their infamous god, Baal Peor. For this offense, 24,000 Israelites had perished in a plague from heaven, and Moses received a command from God to smite the Midianites who had beguiled the people. An army was equipped and sent against Midian. When the army returned victorious, Moses and the princes of the congregation went to meet it, and Moses was wroth with the officers. He observed the women captives, and he asked with astonishment, "Have ye saved all the women alive? Behold, these caused the children of Israel, through the counsel of Balaam, to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation." He then gave an order that the boys and the women should be put to death, but that the young maidens should be kept alive for themselves. I see nothing in this proceeding but good policy combined with mercy. The young men might have become dangerous avengers of what they would esteem their country's wrongs. The mothers might have again allured the Israelites to the love of licentious pleasures and the practice of idolatry, and brought another plague upon the congregation. But the young maidens, not being polluted by the flagitious habits of their mothers, nor likely to create disturbance by rebellion, were kept alive. you give a different turn to the matter. You say that 32,000 women children were consigned to debauchery by the order of Moses. Prove this, and I will allow that Moses was the horrid monster you make him. Prove this, and I will allow that the Bible is what you call it, a book of lies, wickedness, and blasphemy. Prove this, or excuse my warmth if I say to you, as Paul said to Elymas the sorcerer, who sought to turn away Sergius Paulus from the faith, O full of all subtlety and of all mischief, thou child of the devil, thou enemy of all righteousness, wilt thou not cease to pervert the right ways of the Lord? I did not, when I began these letters, think that I should have been moved to this severity of rebuke by anything you could have written, but when so gross a misrepresentation is made of God's proceedings, coolness would be a crime. The women children were not reserved for the purposes of debauchery, but of slavery, a custom abhorrent from our manners, but everywhere practiced in former times, and still practiced in countries where the benignity of the Christian religion has not softened the ferocity of human nature. You here admit a part of the account given in the Bible respecting the expedition against Midian to be a true account. It is not unreasonable to desire that you will admit the whole, or show sufficient reason why you admit one part and reject the other. I will mention the part to which you have paid no attention. The Israelitish army consisted but of 12,000 men, a mere handful when opposed to the people of Midian. Yet, when the officers made a muster of their troops after their return from the war, they found they had not lost a single man. This circumstance struck them as so decisive an evidence of God's interposition that out of the spoils they had taken, they offered an oblation to the Lord, an atonement for their souls. Do but believe what the captains of thousands and the captains of hundreds believed at the time when these things happened, and we shall never more hear of your objections to the Bible from its account of the wars of Moses. You produce 2 or 3 other objections respecting the genuineness of the first 5 books of the Bible. I cannot stop to notice them. Every commentator answers them in a manner suited to the apprehension of even a mere English reader. You calculate to the 1,000th part of an inch the length of the iron bed of Og, the king of Bashan, but you do not prove that the bed was too big for the body, or that a Patagonian would have been lost in it. You make no allowance for the size of a royal bed, nor even suspect that King Og might have been possessed with the same kind of vanity which occupied the mind of King Alexander when he ordered his soldiers to enlarge the size of their beds, that they might give the Indians in succeeding ages a great idea of the prodigious stature of a Macedonian. In many parts of your work you speak much in commendation of science. I join with you in every commendation you can give it, but you speak of it in such a manner as gives room to believe that you are a great proficient in it. If this be the case, I would recommend a problem to your attention, the solution of which you will readily allow to be far above the powers of a man conversant only, as you represent priests and bishops to be, in hic haec hoc. The problem is this: to determine the height to which a human body, preserving its similarity of figure, may be augmented before it will perish by its own weight. When you have solved this problem, we shall know whether the bed of the king of Bashan was too big for any giant, whether the existence of a man 12 or 15 feet high is in the nature of things impossible. My philosophy teaches me to doubt of many things, but it does not teach me to reject every testimony which is opposite to my experience. Had I been born in Shetland, I could, on proper testimony, have believed in the existence of the Lincolnshire ox, or of the largest dray horse in London, though the oxen and horses in Shetland had not been bigger than mastiffs.